Her husband cheated with his ex-wife on the day they were supposed to sign the adoption papers for their child. Yeah, you heard that right. Let me take you from the very beginning. Her name was Elena. She and her husband had been married for 7 years. They had tried for a long time to have their own child, but after several painful miscarriages, they decided to adopt. After 2 years of paperwork, interviews, and waiting, they finally found a little boy, 3-year-old Tim. The day they were supposed to sign the final adoption papers and bring him home was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Elena had prepared the nursery, bought clothes, toys, everything a child could dream of. Her husband seemed just as excited. He kept saying how much he wanted to be a father and how perfect their little family would be. On the morning of the signing, Elena was nervous but incredibly happy. They arrived at the adoption office together. The social worker greeted them warmly and said everything was ready. Tim was there too, a small, shy boy who already called Elena mommy and her husband daddy. Elena felt her heart full of love. The papers were laid out on the table. They only needed to sign a few documents and Tim would officially become their son. Her husband said he needed to step out for a moment to make a quick phone call. Elena smiled and told him to hurry back so they could sign together. 10 minutes passed and her husband still hadn't returned. Elena went looking for him. She walked down the quiet corridor of the office building and noticed a small staff room with the door slightly open. She heard familiar voices. She pushed the door open just a little more. There, in the small room, were her husband and his ex. They were embracing passionately. His hands were under her blouse. She was kissing him the way she used to when they were still married. On the table next to them lay the adoption papers that they were supposed to sign in a few minutes. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, still holding the small toy she had brought for Tim. Her husband saw her first. His face went completely white. His ex-wife pulled away quickly, adjusting her clothes. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then her husband started talking fast, his voice shaking. Elena, please. This is not what it looks like. We were just saying goodbye. She came to wish us well with the adoption. It was a moment of weakness. It meant nothing. His ex-wife added, looking guilty. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to see him one last time before he becomes a father. Elena felt the world tilt under her feet. The papers they were supposed to sign in a few minutes were lying right there on the table next to them. But what happened in the minutes and hours after that moment, that was when the real nightmare began, because the social worker was already waiting in the meeting room with Tim. The adoption was supposed to be finalized that same day, and both her husband and his ex-wife immediately started trying to convince her that it was just a stupid, emotional goodbye, and that she should not ruin the adoption over one meaningless moment. But what happened in the minutes and hours after that moment? That was when the real nightmare began. The social worker was already waiting in the meeting room with little Tim. The boy was sitting on a small chair, holding the toy car Elena had given him earlier that morning. He looked up with big, curious eyes when they entered. Elena's husband and his ex-wife quickly composed themselves. The husband stepped forward first, forcing a smile for the social worker. Sorry for the delay. We're ready to sign. The ex-wife stood slightly behind him, trying to look calm, but her hands were trembling. Elena felt like she was watching everything from outside her own body. The social worker laid the adoption papers on the table and explained the final steps with a warm smile. Tim looked at Elena and said softly, "Mommy." Elena's eyes filled with tears. This little boy had no idea what had just happened. He only knew that he was finally getting a family. Her husband leaned close and whispered in her ear while pretending to look at the documents. "Sign it, Elena. Don't ruin this for him. We can talk about everything later. He needs us both." The ex-wife added quietly, so only Elena could hear, "Please, don't do this in front of the child. He's been waiting for a family for so long." Elena looked at the papers, then at Tim, then at her husband and his ex. The room felt suffocating. She took a slow, deep breath and said to the social worker in a steady voice, I'm sorry. I need a moment alone with my husband. The social worker nodded and took Tim out of the room for a few minutes. The moment the door closed, Elena turned to her husband and his ex-wife. Her voice was quiet but firm. I am not signing anything today. I am not adopting this child with you, and I am filing for divorce. As soon as I leave this building, her husband's face went pale. He started speaking fast, almost pleading. Elena, please, think about Tim. He's been waiting for months. He calls you mommy. Don't take this away from him because of one stupid mistake. We can fix this. We can still be a family. His ex-wife stepped closer, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It was a moment of weakness. Please, don't punish the child for what we did. Elena looked at both of them and said the words that felt like they had been waiting inside her for years. You both betrayed me on the day we were supposed to become a family. I will not build a family on lies. Tim deserves better than this. She walked out of the meeting room, found the social worker, and explained that the adoption would not be proceeding that day. The social worker was shocked, but professional. Tim looked confused when Elena hugged him tightly and whispered that she loved him, but that she needed more time. Her husband tried to follow her out of the building, begging her not to leave. His ex-wife stood in the hallway, crying silently. Elena got into a taxi alone and went straight to her lawyer's office. She filed for divorce the same afternoon. But the real storm began in the days that followed. Because her husband and his ex-wife did not accept her decision quietly, they started calling her family, her friends, and even the adoption agency, telling them that Elena was unstable and making up wild accusations because of the stress of the adoption process. They tried to paint her as the one who was destroying a child's chance at a family. Elena found herself fighting not only for her own peace, but for the truth. But the hardest part was still ahead. Victoria stood in the quiet hallway outside the bridal suite, her white dress suddenly feeling too heavy. The music from the reception downstairs was still playing. Guests were laughing, clapping, waiting for the bride and groom to return for the cake cutting and the first dance. She could hear Daniel and Sophia whispering urgently behind the door. Daniel's voice was low. We have to go back down. Everyone is waiting. We can't let this ruin the night. Sophia answered quickly. Just act normal. We'll talk to her later. She's emotional right now. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. She took a deep breath, wiped the single tear that had escaped, and walked downstairs. When she reappeared in the garden, the guests cheered. Daniel was already there, smiling brightly, acting as if nothing had happened. He walked over to her, took her hand, and kissed her cheek for the cameras. Sophia followed a minute later, her bridesmaid dress perfectly adjusted, smiling like the perfect best friend. The DJ announced the cake cutting. Victoria and Daniel stood in front of the three-tiered cake, knives in hand, smiling for the photos. Daniel whispered in her ear while they posed. Please, just get through tonight. We'll talk about everything when we get to the hotel. Don't ruin this for everyone. Sophia stood right beside them, holding the bouquet, smiling for the guests as if she hadn't just been in the bridal suite with the groom. Victoria smiled through it all. She cut the cake. She fed Daniel a piece. She danced the first dance with him while the guests clapped and took videos. No one noticed that her smile never reached her eyes. The rest of the reception felt like a dream she couldn't wake up from. Guests kept coming up to congratulate them. Her mother hugged her and said how beautiful she looked. Her father raised a toast to the perfect couple. Every time Victoria looked at Daniel, she saw him laughing with guests, playing the role of the happy husband. Every time she looked at Sophia, she saw her best friend smiling and dancing, acting as if nothing had changed. At one point, during a slow song, Daniel pulled her close and whispered, I love you. This is our night. Don't let one stupid mistake ruin it. Victoria didn't answer. She just kept smiling for the cameras. Later that night, after the last guest had left and they were finally alone in the bridal suite, Daniel closed the door, turned to her, and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who believed the matter was already settled. Look, I know you're upset, but we're married now. We have the rest of our lives to work through this. Sophia is your best friend. She's family. We can all move past this. No one else ever needs to know what happened tonight. He said it so calmly, so confidently, as if the decision had already been made for her. Victoria stood in the middle of the bridal suite in her wedding dress, the veil still pinned in her hair. She looked at the man she had just married a few hours earlier and felt something inside her finally break, not with anger, but with clarity. She took off her veil, folded it carefully, and placed it on the table. Then, she looked him straight in the eyes and said quietly but firmly, "I want an annulment. I'm leaving tonight, and I will never forgive either of you for what you did on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life." She packed a small bag with only the essentials, called a taxi, and left the bridal suite that same night. Daniel followed her to the car, still in his wedding suit, begging her not to leave. Sophia stood on the balcony watching silently, her face pale. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Victoria sent a short message to both families and close friends. "The marriage has been annulled. There are reasons I cannot discuss right now. I ask for privacy and respect during this time." Her mother and Daniel's family were shocked. Some tried to convince her to reconsider for the sake of the marriage. Others blamed her for ruining the perfect wedding. But Victoria did not explain. She did not defend herself. She simply moved forward. In the following months, she went through the annulment process quietly. She moved to a new city. She changed her number. She started therapy and slowly rebuilt her life, piece by piece. Daniel and Sophia tried to reach her many times. They sent letters, flowers, messages through mutual friends. They told everyone that Victoria had panicked on her wedding night and that they were devastated but willing to forgive her. Victoria never replied. She kept only one photo from the wedding, the one of her walking down the aisle alone, before she said, "I do." She looked at it sometimes as a reminder of the woman she was before she learned the truth. So, that's the full story. Every single painful, shocking, heartbreaking detail. A woman wrote to me and asked me to tell her story. On the night of her wedding, she caught her new husband with her maid of honor. They tried to convince her to stay silent, to pretend everything was fine, to continue the marriage for the sake of appearances, but she chose herself. She left that same night. She annulled the marriage. She walked away from the fairy tale and started building her own life. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life, if the person who promised to love you chose someone else while you were still wearing your wedding dress, just know this: you are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose yourself, and you will find peace and strength on the other side. You can send your story to my email anytime, and I promise I'll tell it in the next episodes. Subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and let the truth spread everywhere.